Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Ted Takes It Apart. In today's episode, I'm going to be attempting to repair this plastic oil cooler duct off the 944. Using this is a simple plastic welder that uses staples that get heated up that you press into the plastic. So I'll be demonstrating how to use this and see if we can repair that plastic duct. You're going to want to start by cleaning off your plastic as best you can. I used a heavy degreaser mainly on the outside because that's what I'm more concerned about. I'll go back in and clean this out later, but you want to make sure that the outside surface where we'll ultimately be using these staples to bond the plastic together is as clean as possible. You also want to identify that this plastic isn't too far gone or too brittle. In our case, it's still pretty flexible, but I am missing a chunk here that I'll have to come up with some solution later. With this duct, the way it's broken, it's pretty floppy and doesn't hold itself in alignment. So what we're going to want to do is hold the parts together at the seams where they should belong and use a bit of tape to hold this in place. With the tape in place, you can see that I've covered a large portion of this crack to hold it still. Our first weld will be like a tacking weld, just to hold everything together so we can follow this line up while removing the tape. This part's going to be a bit more interesting, and we'll deal with that as we get there. There's a small crack right there that we can push in place. That's probably the first place I'll tack here. But for now, we're going to start at this very edge. These plastic welders come with several different types of staple, and each different type has its own specific purpose. In our case, we're going to be welding in fairly straight lines on a relatively flat surface. So we're going to use this zigzaggy staple. This goes across and essentially stitches both sides of the plastic together. Now, the way this welder works is that with the staple inserted into it like so, as you pull the trigger, the staple will heat up to the point it melts the plastics. So if we're talking about melting plastic, especially on something that's fairly thin, you want to be very cautious that you don't just blow this staple right through the plastic as we're working on it. So move very slowly and very carefully. Maybe practice on something else before you go into the main part you're working on. Better to ruin something that you're not trying to actually save. Okay, do as I say, not as I do. As you can see here on my first attempt, I poked the hole right through it. What I'll end up doing is taking like a screwdriver and warming it up and smoothing this back over to fill that hole back in. But on my second attempt, I just barely pressed it in, and you can see that it's stitched across that plastic, and we'll be able to snap these tabs off. But I'm going to go ahead and try and fix this quickly. Okay, it's not pretty, but there's no longer really a hole there. So what I found is that if you take one of these corner staples and heat it up and carefully smooth the plastic out back over, you can refill it in. Again, this is something that would be very easy to press right back through the plastic, so be careful. And again, since you're not actually leaving this in the plastic, that's going to be really hot when you take it out, so be very careful. So from here, I'm going to continue to staple up this line. Okay, so I finished stapling this up for right now. As you can see, it's closed the gaps. A few lessons I've learned from this. Well, don't push too hard or you blow right through the plastic, like I said not to do. And you want to give this plenty of time to actually dry a bit, so when you pull it out, it doesn't just pull the staple right out. That happened to me a couple of times. Also helps to blow on it, I guess, to help it dry, because these cool off fairly quickly, kind of like hot glue, I guess. I've gone ahead and trimmed the legs off of each of these staples. Wire cutters I had are really pretty bad, so they're not flat, not a very good cut. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the corner staple again and cover the staples with a bit of the extruded plastic, a bit of the plastic that's standing up, just to cover these in, make sure they don't pop out. And then eventually I'll go back over and smooth this out with some sort of sandpaper or a Dremel or something. So it's not exactly pretty, but I've used all the extra plastic that was kind of sitting above the surface from when we pressed these staples in to push it back over and cover these staples. This part is really rather rigid now, and I'll probably end up just smoothing this back out after the fact. So now let's move on to trying to figure out how to get this to sit flat. The standard corner staple is for something that's a bit more of a 90. In our case, we have kind of a rounded edge, and so this staple won't actually work for us. We'd end up just pressing it right through the plastic. So we can very carefully manipulate these staples into a shape that will work for us. And this one's pretty bastardized, but it should fit this angle a fair bit better without poking through. So we'll give this a try, see how that turns out. Okay, yeah, we got that in there. So now what we're gonna do is trim off these extra bits again and then smooth it on over to get these staples fully integrated into this plastic. Again, we got a hole there, which is something I'll address later. But for now, we're just fixing these cracks. Okay, so that's what they look like with the staples in there and the plastic kind of pushed back over the top of them. Maybe not the best job in the world, but this is a hidden duct, and you ultimately don't ever see it, and so it's more important that it functions than it looks good. Again, I need to cover that up. So a few lessons I learned from this is that be very, very careful when pressing these into thin plastic like this. You also want to have a very well ventilated space because, again, you're working around plastic fumes. In my case, I got a lot of air moving through here. Probably wear a respirator if you can. These staples get very hot, so be very careful. Having some sort of extra plastic to work with to add filler material would probably be ideal in a lot of scenarios. In this case, we were able to use some of that lifted plastic from around it. But yeah, so going forward, I'd get really sharp pliers, something to cut this down really close to the surface so you don't have to do much sanding or anything. But yeah, this is a great tool for some of those hard to get old plastics or some things that are just expensive and you don't really feel like you need to buy a new one when you could just fix it yourself. So I hope this was informative, and I hope you guys go out and make use of this information and fix your own stuff. So thanks again for watching, and I hope you have a great day.